Thousands of veterans every year are saddled with medical debt, many turned over to collection agencies after trips to the emergency room. A new KARE 11 investigation discovers it's happening because the VA does not consistently apply its own rules. Investigative reporter AJ Legault has the story.
It was a tough night.
When you're parents of a newborn, there can be a lot of sleepless nights.
That's right.
But for Ben and Gretchen Krause, there is one night back in February that really stands out.
The idea of losing him, Ben, with a little baby here, really scary.
Ben began experiencing severe chest pain.
I felt like my chest was about to pop.
And had trouble breathing,
Baby here, and
fearing her husband was having a heart attack.
I remember he said, "Something's wrong, something's wrong."
Gretchen drove the family a mile to the nearest emergency room at Woodwinds. They were here for 9 hours. Doctors determined it was not a heart attack, but instead an extreme form of stress, exacerbated by a recent death in the family.
The technical term for it is malignant hypertension with neurological and cardiovascular complications. Couldn't dial back the stress from what was going on in the grief process.
A veteran, Ben expected the Minneapolis VA would pick up the $6,000 ER bill. He was mistaken.
I got a letter in the mail saying they were going to deny me.
Why? The letter says it was because the treatment provided does not meet the prudent layperson definition of an emergency.
Apparently a prudent, normal guy wouldn't have gone to the emergency room if they were experiencing chest pains like I was.
Ben's case raises the question, what does the VA believe is a prudent layperson's definition of an emergency? We looked to the VA's prudent layperson fact sheet. It describes someone with an average knowledge of health who believes failure to obtain immediate medical care could result in placing the patient's health in serious jeopardy.
I'm not a doctor, I'm not a nurse. I know when to go to the ER. You go to the ER when someone is in distress, and he was in distress.
Now it's time you know something else about Ben. He's one of the most prominent veterans' rights attorneys in the nation.
With bad faith insurance adjudication, that's against the law.
Ben believes in his case, the VA acted in bad faith. Back to the VA's own prudent layperson fact sheet. Under case example A, it describes a patient going to the ER complaining of chest pain, but given a diagnosis of mild gastric irritation. But because chest pain is a potentially serious problem, it, quote, clearly falls into the category of what any prudent layperson would consider an appropriate use of the emergency department.
Right.
This is almost, when you look at it, this is almost verbatim your case.
Right. It's black and white, and it's case example A.
We wanted to know, is Ben's an isolated case or a systemic pattern of dubious denials?
If it happened to me, I guarantee it's happening to thousands of veterans nationwide.
He's right. During a congressional hearing last year,
VA is many times forced to deny a significant number of emergency treatment claims.
This VA undersecretary submitted a written statement admitting in just 1 year, 98,000 veterans had their claim denied because the VA determined it was not an emergency. And here's the most important part. Quote, many of these denials are the result of inconsistent application of the prudent layperson standard.
It's absurd.
Ben wrote about his experience on his popular veterans blog, serving notice to the VA that he was working with KARE 11 to get to the bottom of his imprudent VA denial.
The second that they realize that somebody is looking into it, and somebody with an ability to make it into a national story, once they realize that, then they called and said, oh, sorry, we made a mistake. We're going to take care of it now.
Well, Minneapolis VA officials refused to be interviewed for this story, but in an email, they blamed a coding error by the non-VA emergency room for the denial. A Minnesota veteran turned over to collections after the VA refuses to pay for medical care they instructed him to get. Investigative reporter AJ Legault continues to dig into the VA's bizarre refusals to pay for veterans' emergency room treatment.
It's a great place to go get care. I had no complaints at all.
Army veteran Bob Ramsey wanted that point about the Minneapolis VA's actual medical care made crystal clear. But he also believes VA bureaucracy did him wrong.
Exactly.
Bob now works as a dispatcher for a trucking company after years as a tank mechanic for Uncle Sam.
Some days if I have to walk a lot, my knee will swell up.
His knees are shot.
Right when I'll have to be replaced, eventually.
In 2015, he needed a knee surgery, but the wait time at the Minneapolis VA was too long. So he was approved for the Veterans Choice Program that President Obama signed into law, allowing veterans facing lengthy VA delays to get care at private hospitals. Bob's surgery was done at Maple Grove.
So I got that done and thought everything would be okay.
Bob has a blood disorder, so he was warned if he had any unusual pain after surgery not to ignore it.
Because I could have a blood clot.
About a week after his surgery at Maple Grove, Bob had growing pain in his calf, so called the Minneapolis VA, asking if he should come in to their ER. He says he spoke with the nurse on duty.
And she said, well, you should go in and be seen right away, but you should go back to where you had the surgery. And so that's what I did.
You can probably guess what happens next.
Right there.
Bob got a letter in the mail from the Minneapolis VA refusing to pay for his ER visit because he could have gone to the VA.
VA or federal facility was available to provide services. Claim denied. I called for advice, to ask what they want me to do. They told me what to do. I did what they told me to do, and then they refused to pay.
Bob says he tried reasoning with the VA for nearly a year.
Exactly.
Meanwhile, his bill from Maple Grove was turned over to a collection agency.
They'll continue to call and harass you. You know, this is your bill. You should get the service. You should pay for it. You know, you're a bad person because you didn't pay your bills.
Bob is not alone. During a congressional hearing last year,
The VA is many times forced to deny a significant number of emergency treatment claims.
this VA undersecretary testified that in just 1 year, the VA denied payment of $2.6 billion for veterans' ER bills. 140,000 claims were denied because a VA facility was determined to have been available. Bob's story raises serious questions about the fairness and validity of those denials affecting veterans all across the nation.
And I thought, well, I might as well speak up, because if we don't speak up, no one's going to listen.
Apparently, the Minneapolis VA is now listening. One day after KARE 11 contacted them asking about Bob's denial, he got this voicemail from VA official Mike Rosecrans.
Hey, I just want you to know that the claims, the ER emergent care claims, will be processed today for payment.
Bob wonders
Yes.
why it took a call from a reporter for the VA to do what's right.
Yeah, that's bureaucracy.
Well, the Minneapolis VA sent us a statement that said, in part, thanks for bringing this issue to our attention. This was an error on our part, and Bob's claim is being processed for payment.
He said, it's terrible, terrible pain, and you have to get relief.
Tonight, an elderly veteran dealing with a potentially life-threatening condition gets what he calls a slap in the face from the VA. Thank you for joining us tonight. The veteran claims the VA is refusing to pay his emergency medical bill.
A.J. Legault has been investigating the VA for several years now, and tonight, a new chapter in his continuing look at a pattern of denial.
A tranquil existence on the shore of Lake Pokegama in northern Minnesota is how 78-year-old Army veteran Jerry Malwitz expected to spend his golden years.
I don't want it destroyed by this type of garbage.
The garbage is medical bills Jerry says he should not owe.
I don't deserve this.
And a letter from the Department of Veterans Affairs saying claim denied.
Treatment provided does not meet the prudent layperson's definition of an emergency.
Drafted by Uncle Sam in the early 1960s, Jerry receives all of his medical care through the VA. But last August, a catheter he has, due to an enlarged prostate, got plugged.
Well, I was half crazy with the pain. I was moaning and groaning.
It was 8 o'clock at night, and the nearest VA hospital in St. Cloud was 140 miles away.
And I needed help now. I mean, it hurt. My heart attack was nothing compared to that urinary retention.
Jerry's wife rushed him to the Grand Rapids emergency room.
The doctor said your urinary retention hurts as bad as a woman having a baby. I'm not a woman, but I told the doctor the pain I had was as tough as if I had triplets.
Veterans who get their medical care from the VA can go to an outside hospital in an emergency, and the VA is supposed to pay the portion not covered by other insurance. But remember, the VA is trying to stick Jerry with a bill, claiming what he had was not even a true emergency.
And I know what an emergency is. It isn't because you got a hangnail on your big toe.
Jerry says maybe the VA should try reading how the U.S. Department of Health describes urinary retention as a potentially life-threatening medical condition that requires immediate emergency treatment.
It hurts.
What also hurts is the calls from debt collectors and the threat of a ruined credit rating. Jerry says he's lost track of the time he's spent unsuccessfully trying to get the VA to reconsider his denial.
Hours. I wake up at night and think of this. Do I deserve that?
So far, the Department of Veterans Affairs refuses to respond to our direct questions about Jerry's case and those of a number of other veterans with similar denials. Is it faster to just deny?
Always.
Tonight, a VA insider speaks out, exposing how he says a quota system is sticking veterans with emergency medical bills they don't truly owe.
It is the latest in a KARE 11 investigation into whether the VA is honoring our nation's contract to care for veterans. Here's investigative reporter AJ Legault with a pattern of denial.
I remember he said, something's wrong, something's wrong.
Fearing her husband Ben was having a heart attack, Gretchen Krause rushed him to the nearest ER.
It felt like my chest was about to pop.
Bob Ramsey was concerned he might have clots caused by a blood disorder, so also went to a nearby emergency room.
And I was always warned if I had any issues with my leg pain, things like that, that I should be seen immediately.
Bob and Ben are both veterans, both qualified for the VA to pay for their care at a non-VA hospital in an emergency. But the VA refused, sending them denial letters.
I would have had to pay $6,000, over $6,000 out of my own pocket.
In both cases, the Minneapolis VA did an about-face once KARE 11 began investigating, admitting the denials were mistakes and agreeing to pay.
Hey, Bob.
Here's a voicemail a VA official left Bob.
The ER emergent care claims will be processed today for payment.
The second that they realize that somebody's looking into it, and somebody with an ability to make it into a national story, once they realized that, then they called and said, oh, sorry, we made a mistake. We're going to take care of it now.
But how did the mistaken denials happen in the first place? Our search for answers led us to a VA employee named Joe.
Correct.
He has a painful confession to make.
It's been weighing on me a lot.
When we met Joe, he was working as a voucher examiner for the VA's Office of Community Care. That's the office that either approves or denies emergency treatment claims like Bob's and Ben's.
A Minnesota veteran turned over to collections after
He'd seen our reports and told us he believes there are a lot more veterans out there stuck with emergency medical bills the VA should have paid.
You know for a 100% fact that there are claims being done incorrectly?
Yes.
Because you've done them incorrectly?
Yes.
An admission in direct conflict with Joe's own 2016 VA employee performance appraisal. In glowing terms, it claims he's an exceptional employee who's accurate an incredible 99% of the time.
Is that true?
Probably not.
Joe says they don't really monitor errors. What they do track and focus on is how many claims examiners complete each hour.
We are accountable for speed, and the faster you are, your performance goes up.
So just how fast does the VA expect examiners like Joe to be when they go through a veteran's often complicated emergency medical bill claim? Joe's performance review spells it out. To get an exceptional employee rating, the target for handling claims like Ben and Bob's is $22 an hour. Let's do some math. If an examiner has 60 minutes to review 22 claims, that means on average less than 3 minutes spent reviewing each one. 3 minutes to determine whether it was a real emergency, service-connected, covered by other insurance, or if they should have gone to a VA hospital instead.
We were told to pick and click and get them moving.
This Government Accountability Office report from 2014 backs up what Joe is saying in surprising detail. It found all the VA reports on emergency care claims focus on timeliness rather than the appropriateness of VA facilities' denial of such claims.
Are claims being denied unfairly Because you and other claims examiners are not reading them thoroughly.
Yes.
And here's where the VA's focus on speed goes even further off the rails. Joe says it's a lot faster to deny a veteran's claim than to go through all the steps it takes to approve it.
Look for a reason to deny it. It's the fastest way to get your numbers.
In a statement, the Department of Veterans Affairs denied it has quotas, saying employees have a performance plan that measures production standards, effectiveness, quality, and customer service. This issue of emergency treatment claims came up at a congressional hearing last year.
VA is many times forced to deny a significant number of emergency treatment claims.
Why? VA told Congress in this statement it's because determination of these claims is nuanced and unclear for veterans. So how many denials are there? KARE 11 crunched 2.5 years worth of VA data and found in the VA Midwest network, which includes Minnesota, 52% of all emergency medical claims are denied. That's $65 million forced back onto veterans to pay. Nationwide, it adds up to $2.6 billion in just 1 year, leaving this VA insider to wonder how many veterans are being saddled with bills they should not owe.
Sometimes what's being denied obviously should be approved.
Yes.
That's a damning claim.
Yes.
Joe, who requested we not use his last name, no longer works as a claims examiner, but still works in a different position for the Department of Veterans Affairs. And to fact check what he was telling us, I spoke with two other people who worked with Joe as VA claims examiners, and they back up what he says, that the focus is all about speed and meeting the quota, or as the VA labels it, the production standard, as opposed to ensuring veterans' cases are handled thoroughly and fairly.
Well, a powerful member of Congress today is calling for a federal investigation in response to a KARE 11 investigation.
Last night we reported how the VA was wrongly sticking veterans with medical bills they should not owe. And A.J. Legault joining us with the latest in his continuing investigation.
Yeah, Randy, today Congressman Tim Walz, the ranking member of the House Committee on Veterans Affairs, said what he'd seen in our reports is unacceptable. And the Inspector General needs to step in and determine how widespread this pattern of denials truly is.
And when you point out a story like I saw that you ran, I think it warrants looking at it.
Congressman Tim Walz says he'd watched KARE 11's investigation that uncovered veterans being saddled with medical debt they should not owe after rushing to non-VA ERs during a medical emergency.
The VA denied my claim, saying I was, more or less imprudent.
Some even had their bills turned over to collection agencies.
I paid the bill because it was already in collection. I didn't want that hurting my credit any more than what it already had.
We're looking into it. I think after your report, we're going to ask, we'll ask the IG as we always do to look in a little deeper, see if this is systemic, and try and figure out how deep it goes.
A whistleblower tells KARE 11 improper denials are systemic because VA staffers are pressured to review complex files in just minutes in order to meet their required quota, or as the VA labels it, production standards.
We were told to pick and click and get them moving.
You know for a 100% fact that there are claims being done incorrectly.
Yes.
Because you've done them incorrectly.
Yes.
Let's figure out if this is a problem either in staffing or if there is a cultural issue forcing quantity or look good over actually being good. We should find that out.
Well, as you heard, Congressman Walz is asking for the Inspector General to step in. I can tell you this investigation has struck a chord with a lot of veterans and their families. My inbox filling up with emails from vets across the country who claim they too have had their emergency medical bills improperly denied.
If it wasn't for AJ and KARE 11, I'd be fighting this battle for who knows how long.
A KARE 11 investigation continues to make a difference in the lives of our nation's service members. Thanks for joining us tonight. We've been exposing how veterans are being saddled with medical debt they should not owe, some of it even turned over to collection agencies after trips to the emergency room.
The VA is now offering apologies and backtracking on denials for some of the veterans whose stories we've shared. Here's investigative reporter A.J. Legault with the latest in his series, A Pattern of Denial.
I never say I came home, I came back.
Rocky Waite came back from Vietnam to Little Canada, Minnesota.
This is where my daughter lives.
More than 50 years ago. An Army medic, what he saw is still with him.
Yeah, there's a lot of stories.
It's part of what drove him to help his town build and dedicate a Veterans Memorial Park.
And I might be a little bit prejudiced, but I think it's the best one in Minnesota.
A proud veteran with a 100% service-connected disability.
I'm right over here.
He never expected to be fighting again in his old age with the federal agency charged with caring for those who've served.
They're the Veterans Administration, but they're not veteran-friendly.
For the 71-year-old, it's a battle that began with a large kidney stone.
The pain just got to be excruciating.
He called the Minneapolis VA and was told to go to the nearest ER. He had emergency surgery at St. John's and was told in 10 days he needed a stent removed. Following protocol, he called the VA nurses hotline, asking if the stent should be removed at the VA or back at the private hospital. His VA records clearly show he was instructed to go back to St. John's.
I took their advice and went, had the procedure done. Next thing I got was a denial letter from the VA saying I didn't follow protocol.
Despite doing everything right, Rocky was stuck with a $1,200 bill.
So I did as I was told. I don't know how else you could do it.
He appealed and was again denied. Then he saw something that really made him mad.
And then I was watching the television and spotted the story on KARE 11.
Our investigation exposing other veterans with wrongful ER bill denials. He emailed us his records.
This one came in from Mr. Rocky Waite.
And we mentioned his case on air.
Sticking this veteran with a $1,200 bill. So he's now asking the question, hey, what should I do?
The very next day,
kind of almost a miracle.
Rocky got a voicemail from a VA official.
So we'll get that paid for probably today. I'm sorry about the hassle you went through.
Payment and apology. Unlike Vietnam, this is a battle Rocky can now forget.
If it hadn't been for KARE 11, I'd have still been fighting this battle, and it could go on for years with these people.
In response to our reporting on wrongful ER denials, Senator Klobuchar tells me she'll be speaking directly with VA Secretary Shulkin this week.
It makes me think that they need to change their process, and that is what I'll be talking to the Secretary about.
New tonight, how one elderly Minnesota man and a small team of attorneys took on the VA and won a precedent-setting case that could put billions of dollars back into veterans' pockets. Here's investigative reporter AJ Legault with the latest in his series of reports, a pattern of denial.
This is one of many boxes that we have for Mr. Staub's case.
When you think legal cases, with national, multi-billion-dollar implications.
7 years and several boxes of these.
A tiny law office in St. Cloud, Minnesota is probably not what you imagine, as even attorney Jackie Shu admits.
It truly, really is a Davy and Goliath story.
In this story, Goliath is the Department of Veterans Affairs. David is not a boy, although Richard Staub was a young man when he served in the Air Force in Korea. He's now elderly and in such failing health, he could not be interviewed.
Mr. Staub is just a gentle soul who is kind of shy, very humble, living on a fixed income in an apartment on the east side of St. Cloud.
In 2010, Mr. Staub suffered a heart attack and stroke and was treated at St. Cloud Hospital. Medicare picked up some of the cost, but he was still left with $48,000 in bills, which he submitted to the St. Cloud VA for payment. He was denied.
The denial was based upon the internal rule that the VA had been enforcing since 2010.
That internal rule required veterans to have no other health insurance, including Medicaid, in order for the VA to pay. But there's a problem.
In violation of U.S. law.
Their regulation violates federal law.
That is correct.
The Veterans Emergency Care Fairness Act, passed by Congress in 2009, requires the VA to pay for emergency care for which a qualified veteran is personally liable. No mention of other insurance being a prohibition.
It is pretty cut and dry.
Little did Jackie know when she took the Staub case pro bono that it would become a 7-year legal battle filled with denials and lost appeals, until ultimately this year, a federal court of appeals ruled the VA's internal regulation was wholly inconsistent with federal law, and Mr. Staub was entitled to reimbursement. The VA appealed that ruling until, in a congressional hearing in June, the VA secretary made a surprise announcement.
I have decided to voluntarily withdraw the appeal to to the Staub case.
Oh, that's great news, Mr. Secretary.
By the VA's own estimates, this Minnesota veterans case will impact the lives of hundreds of thousands of other veterans. VA is now liable to pay 370,000 previously denied claims, totaling more than $2 billion.
And this is one of those where you say, yeah, there truly is a good, and right is right, and the decision was right, and we did good.
They certainly did do good. Jackie Shu is actually recognized as Attorney of the Year by the Minnesota Bar for her work on that case. Here's the kicker, though. Despite dropping their appeal, the VA has still not paid Mr. Staub, who, as we said, is in failing health. And if he passes first, the VA's obligation to reimburse dies with him, leaving nothing for his family.
Tonight, the latest in the KARE 11 investigation, a pattern of denial.
Was VA following its own rules?
No, that was the point. They weren't following their own criteria. They weren't following their own requirements and policies.
A federal government investigator describing how the VA was sticking veterans with emergency bills they should not owe. Those findings mirror what KARE 11 Investigates has been exposing for months.
Investigative reporter AJ Legault joins us with the latest. AJ?
Yeah, when you're having an emergency health situation, you go to the nearest ER. If you're a qualified veteran, the law says the VA has to pay. But our investigation found all too often that's not happening. And we now know the government has known all about the problem for years.
Some veterans were likely billed for care that VA should have paid for.
It's 2014, and Government Accountability Office investigator Randy Williamson is testifying before Congress.
It was pretty much a pattern of a lot of errors.
Describing the GAO's findings that the Department of Veterans Affairs was mishandling emergency medical bill claims.
We found that basically VA was doing a very poor job, and they were erroneously denying claims.
His investigation found VA staffers breaking rules, leaving veterans financially liable for bills VA should have paid.
20% of the cases we looked at were wrong, were denied inappropriately.
Is that an acceptable error rate?
Heavens no, it's not.
Fast forward 3 years, and KARE 11's investigation
I don't deserve this.
Is finding the same problems.
Whether the VA should pay this claim is black and white.
In case.
The bill is over $1,200.
After case.
I was getting collection calls.
After case.
It's the expectation that this issue was being fixed.
That was the expectation.
The GAO found clerks were denying medical bills without a qualified clinician reviewing them.
No, they were just denying it.
Really?
Williamson documented how the VA would give vets pre-approval to go to an outside hospital, then deny their claim as unauthorized. Exactly what we found still happening to vets like Bob Ramsey.
I called for advice, to ask what they want me to do. They told me what to do. I did what they told me to do, and then they refused to pay.
3 years.
This whistleblower told KARE 11 it's happening because to meet VA performance goals, employees have just minutes to review claims.
Are claims being denied unfairly because you and other claims examiners are not reading them thoroughly?
Yes. We were told to pick and click and get them moving.
The GAO found VA management only tracking how quickly claims were done without checking if they were done correctly.
Nobody was checking?
Nobody was checking.
And there's more at stake than veterans getting stuck with bills they don't owe. Fearing those bills, GAO found veterans putting their lives at risk by bypassing the closest emergency room to drive miles to the VA, including one vet with a gunshot wound.
When his wife drove him to a veterans hospital 100 miles away rather than go to the nearest facility in the community.
Why?
Because the veteran thought that he would be on the hook for the bill.
The GAO report made 12 recommendations, but Williamson told Congress back in 2014 he was concerned VA was not fully implementing them.
It's not completely fixed.
3 years later, CARE's investigation proves that, finding veterans like Jerry Malwitz
and then this number
still
here.
falling victim to VA's pattern of improper denials.
I wake up at night and think of this. Do I deserve that?
In the wake of our reporting, the VA Inspector General told Congress they were launching a nationwide investigation. If they're looking for a roadmap to the problem, they won't have to search much further than that government report from just 3 years ago.